Well, happy Friday evening, everybody. And I do hope that I have all things set up as they should be here and that my proper mic is on. So I want to thank you all for being here. And I hope you had a good time last night when Jeffrey Dougherty, Rocky Stucci, and I broadcast the triumvirately from the depot in Hastings, Minnesota. Wish you all could have been there. We had a nice crowd, a modest crowd for a small town bar and grill, and it was a good time. And so I'm glad you could make it if you made it. And it was fun seeing everybody. Rocky and Jeff were out gallivanting today. Or I'm pretty sure there's going to be some spontaneous live updates from there, either here or on Facebook. And you'll see some of the sites that Rocky, John Ward, and I visited 3 years ago last month and did some filming. So we're going to take Jeff down there and show him the sights down there and show him what we saw and what we encountered when we were down there and get his take and see what he feels and sees down there. So that should be a lot of fun. And down in Faribault, if you remember us having talked about that before, hey, Richie, how you doing? I saw you come in the other night and I didn't say hi. So it's good to see you tonight. Glad to catch you, Susie Q, Audrey, and everybody else who's here so far. And when we were down there 3 years ago, we, of course, encountered some pretty strange things. It was an old farm. That was a boys' farm, the Walcott Boys' Farm. And this place was attached somehow to the old insane asylum, if you will, that was put up there in the late 1800s, 1888, I think it was, to be exact. And back then it bore the great politically incorrect name of if I get this right, it was for imbeciles and feeble-minded and something of that nature. And so you can see the language is one of those grand, think of some of the insane asylums that you see now that are from 100 to 150 years ago. And they're just amazing old places. And many of them were going to, it's out in the old farm for boys. And it was where they sent wayward delinquent boys, probably boys without parents. The asylum itself was said to house, there were a lot of young ladies there who were brought because their families were embarrassed that they had gotten pregnant, or because children themselves were deformed or had some kind of mental impairment, and so they sent them to this home. And there was also a very, it's rumored that there was impropriety that went on behind the scenes. I can't throw out any accusations. These were just some of the rumors in the story, maybe some of it urban myth, that there was a lot of sex that went on there. There were sex rings operated out of there. Now, the historians might tell you of the county area down there in Minnesota might give you a different story. But we're going to see if we can probe them a little bit tomorrow, if we can meet up with some of them and talk about some of this stuff that has been in that rumor category. And, of course, everybody down there has their stories of the hauntings and so on. You go out in the woods, and when Rocky and John and I were there, if you've had opportunity to see some of the videos that Rocky and I have put up over the years, Rocky mostly puts them up over the last couple of years on the anniversary of, and it's the videos that we took while we were there going through the woods, finding the old foundations to the place. John Ward had drummed up an old hand-drawn map, found a copy of it at the Historical Society, and or the original, and took a copy of it, of a hand-drawn map to this place dated 1914. And so we were using that map as we were going through the woods, and we'd find foundations and concrete substructures, walls, things like that, deep in the thick woods, and we'd be uncovering them. And John say, okay, this is the corner on this map right here. So if we walk that way, I will just tell you this, There was one point where we were walking away from one of the old concrete structures. It was built later. We think it was built during the war. We haven't found a definition of that. But on this site, built during like World War II, these old concrete bunkers, which were then used by the farm for animals, things like that. And we were in there. And as we were leaving, high up in the trees, and it's still daylight. It's late afternoon on a summer day, and we could hear a woman calling to us. And Rocky was particularly moved by this, and it was drawing him back in. And you could hear it. You could even hear it on some of the videos that we've shared. As it wasn't even an EVP; it was high up on. We went way back to the tree line and up, and all there was all around us was farmland and forest. And so there were no houses. No, it almost sounded at one point like there was a playground, like there was women and children and things like that. And we'd go up to look, and there was nobody around the area, and no place for them to be playing, and no homes in the area. So we were way out in the country. So this is the place we're going to be going. Jennifer, good to see you. It was fun to see you all in a different setting. I have to go to sleep, but I thought I'd say hi first and recap later in the AM. Nice to see you, Jennifer. You have a nice night. Sorry you can't stick around. And yeah, last night was a very different setting for us all. And line us up. I think next time we do that, which might be in a couple of months, down there, as Rocky's talked to them about coming in every other month or so and doing the same thing. Jeff's already confirmed that he would love to come up for that each time we do that. We'll probably set it up a bit differently. We'll probably have different lights, a little better lighting, maybe a little better camera action, maybe a little better sound, something where we can pan to the audience. We did have, when Jeff did his little comedy bit at the beginning, we did turn the camera for him, and you got a bit of his butt and his back, and you saw the audience behind. But next time, we'll see what we can do to maybe brush that up a little bit. Shannon Kling, how you doing? Good to see you. Nice for you to say hello. Nice to say hello back. Holly, nice to see you. And everybody who's streaming in, good to see you as well. And it's Friday night. It's one of those nights where you don't expect high volume of people tuning in live. But we'll see if it catches on as we go tonight. If not, these broadcasts are always available in archive form within 10, 15 minutes of the end of the show. It'll be up on the page, so you can catch it anytime. And Three Sexy Men, Jeff, Jeff and Rocky. Well, thank you for saying that. I'm definitely the old man of the crowd. I've got Jeff by a couple of years, 1 or 2 years, I'm not sure. And Rocky, I think, is about 10 years younger than I am. Something like that. Maybe 12, 13 years. So he's the youngster in the crowd. And probably the one in the best shape of all of us. So it was fun. We had all our respective better halves with us last night. Jeff had Cynthia with him, and Rocky had Lisa, and I had Rainey. And so you may have, if you heard the broadcast last night, you heard Rainey talking a little bit last night too, and Cynthia as well. So I will tell you, Lisa Stucci showed me some photos last night of strange things that they've encountered. I'm not going to steal their thunder at all. I am just going to tell you the photos, because I know who they are. I know they aren't fake. And that's all I'm going to say about them. And it absolutely blew me away. So they've all had their experiences as well. Now, my own show, my new show, this show, the next time you hear it is going to be live on national syndication with Odyssey Network on Monday the 19th. So just 3 days from now. Monday, YouTube stream, whatever you want to call it, that's going to morph back into the old Intrepid radio program, which I did with John Ward. And I'm going to pick that up where we left it off 3.5 years ago and start broadcasting Intrepid Radio live on Monday. Same time slot. The only way you will not see me here in YouTube is if I screw something up and I can't make it work. But it seems like it's pretty straightforward. What I'm doing here gets picked up by the network stream. It plays to, I don't know if I will be on all terrestrial stations. I will find out. But I know Odyssey is linked with Mojo 50, where Rocky broadcasts and where Rocky and Jeff broadcast Sunday night with their Shut Up and Listen. And now also the Situation Room will also be broadcasting via not just Mojo 50, but through Odyssey Network. And so we'll all be broadcasting live there. And you'll pick up this show live next week. I will not say that I may not have occasion where I would pre-record a show, but you may not ever know if I do anyway. So it all depends on scheduling and things like that. But so far, it's going to take place same time slot, 9 p.m. Central Standard Time, 10 p.m. Eastern. The only thing is it's not going to be open-ended like I do this show. We tend to go an hour and a half to an hour and 45 minutes every night. The new show is going to be 25 minutes in the first segment, 28 minutes in the second segment. And boom, we're done. 1 hour, just like the Situation Room. So this is testing the waters again to go live, see what kind of audience we garner, see how people take to the show on a much broader basis. So if you want to spread the word that we're getting started, and you watch my Facebook for announcements, probably some announcements here over the weekend, and you'll see, we'll just all see what happens. I think it's going to be a lot of fun. I don't approach these things with a lot of nervousness or anxiety or stress. I just look at it and say, I'm going to have fun with this, and we'll make it work. The only thing that stresses me out is when tech defies me. It's like it sticks up its fist and raises it at me and defies me. Stream live until I totally redid everything. Now I've still got this unstable thing showing up, so you may find some glitches as we're going along. I know I watched when was the last show we did? Wednesday night. I watched that show yesterday morning just to see how it played, and there were several glitches where it didn't show buffering. It just snaps right over into, like, it skipped a whole sentence or a whole paragraph of what I said. And I thought, oh, it's missing things. Remember when I was talking about the Red Ryder rifle with the Boy Scout emblem on it? It skipped the whole part about the Boy Scout emblem on the stock and jumped to just Red Ryder. And so it made sense listening to it, but you missed part of the story. That's what this buffering thing is doing to me. So if you see that, ignore it. Hopefully it will get better as we get the text straightened out. So there you go. Now tonight, we're going to talk about Cain and the Other People again. And I do want you to know, by the way, you know how I like to talk politics. And I've done this for years on radio. Now, we're going to do a lot less politics on the Intrepid radio program. Doesn't mean there won't be any. It's like tonight. I would love to sit down and talk about, I just saw, Trump said he wanted to buy Greenland. And I'm seeing posts from anti-Trumpers that I know, some of them very good people, very intelligent people, and they're calling him an idiot, and they're saying this is a sure sign of dementia and everything like that. I just want to put one little bug in your ears, folks. For Trump to suggest that we buy Greenland is not a far-fetched idea, nor is it a sign of impending dementia or mental instability, as some have said. Most people will parrot that line, not having any idea about our own history. Did you know? First of all, my first year we bought Alaska. We also bought from the French the Louisiana Purchase. What year was that? That was Andrew Jackson. So that would have been a little later than that. I'm trying to think of the year that was. I also believe that was in the 1860s. Maybe a little sooner. I'm not quite sure what year that took place off the top of my head. We also had Harry S. Truman. Well, wait, we bought the Virgin Islands before they were named the Virgin Islands. We bought that territory down in the Caribbean. Now, we also had President Harry S. Truman, who succeeded FDR, also made a huge offer of over $100 million, which at the time would have equated to about $1 billion now. But he made the offer to buy Greenland from Denmark. So Harry S. Truman did it. Andrew Jackson did it. Other presidents have done it. Buying Greenland is not a far-fetched, stupid idea. 1803. Thank you, Audrey. I was thinking it was right. He was right after who succeeded Jefferson as president. Tyler Polk, Taylor, Fillmore, Lincoln, Pierce, Buchanan. But going the other way, Washington, blah, 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 Jefferson, so on. Who succeeded Jefferson? I know Jefferson sent Lewis and Clark out in 1805. So that was a way I kind of date things in my head. And it's not that I'm a historian, folks. I love history. Some dates stick in my head like flies on rice. All right, I said the polite version of that. Other dates, I got to look them up all the time. It's like me trying to remember whatever that thing Rocky said during the Situation Room when we came in and Audrey was playing some cool, whatever that little quote was. I still can't remember that. Although I can remember I can remember Shakespeare from when I was 18, 19 years old. So I'll give you here's a test run of that. There was a scene I played Antipholus of Syracuse in not Love's Labor's Lost, a Comedy of Errors. I was in Love Labor's Lost too as Adriano Di Armando. First tale of the mixed up twin brothers, who one set of twin brothers. One guy was the twin and he had a servant, and they had twins that were the twin brother and the servant's twin brother. And one set of twins knew the others existed and were searching for them their whole lives. And the other set didn't know they had twin brothers. And this is where a Comedy of Errors came in. And we wander into this town in the Shakespearean play. And I fall in love with the wife of my twin brother, who doesn't know I exist. I don't know it's his wife, the Shakespearean characters. So the comedy goes on in that I think they're all witches and they're cursed. How could they possibly know me? Why do they know who I am? And so on. But I start falling for the wife's younger sister in the play and start trying to woo her. And so that's some of the comedy that goes on. But I remember this line. He looks at her. He's chasing her kind of around a bench in the gardens. Not chasing, not like trying to abduct her. They're in the gardens. He's trying to woo her. And Antipholus says to the young maiden, he says, "Ah, maiden, what your name is else, I know not, nor by what wonder you do hit of mine. Less in your knowledge and your grace, you do show all of earth's wonder. Nay, more than earth, divine. Speak, dear creature, and I shall dote. Spread o'er the silver waves thy golden hairs, and as a bed I'll take them and there lie. And in this glorious supposition think, he gains by death that hath such means to die. Let love being light be drowned if she sink." And she responds, "Sir, you are mad." And I say, "Nay, but mated." So Shakespeare, my whole point with that whole dumb, stupid thing was the fact that I remember things. I don't know why I remember them. But then there are important things I can't remember, like what date and so on. Did somebody look that up while I was rambling and blethering on? So all these purchases of territory have taken place. Think Louisiana Purchase, Alaska Purchase, Virgin Islands Purchase, all initiated by presidents, all initiated for the United States for our own self-interest. People go, "Well, that's just self-interest." Well, duh. We're not going to look to purchase property to annex, not even annexing, to add to the United States territory for some stupid reason. It's generally not done. And Greenland has been looked at before, more than once. Since 1867, they've been trying to get Greenland from Denmark. And Truman was the last one, I think, to effectively make an offer. And Denmark just said, no thanks. So it all depends. I rather doubt Denmark is going to want to sell us Greenland. but it is a strategic location. Leave it that in mind. So when you hear people talking about this over the upcoming days or weeks or whatever, don't worry about it. Trump is not in dementia. He is not going insane. He's not lost his mind or lost touch with reality. This is what presidents do. And if he cracks a joke about, hey, it'd be a great place to build a golf course, so what? It's funny. All right. Moving on. Sterling, I see you there. Macabre. How about Pindar and the Greek poet from Thebes, Scotty? Who dat? Off the top of my head, I don't know. Pindar, I'm not recognizing. Not the great poet from Thebes. I don't have any idea off the top of my head. I'd have to look it up. I'll bet you I'd look it up and I go, oh, him. Oh, that. Right now, gone. Doesn't ring a bell. So that's like we used to say, the thing is gone from me. That was the response when Joseph and Daniel both, I think it was Daniel in the Bible, was interpreting dreams. And the king says, I had this dream and it was horrible. And the thing is, the Thule, I always thought that was a cool name, the Thule Air Force Base, the Thule. Now, might as well save the rent. I don't think Denmark's going to kick us out of there anytime soon. It's strategic. It helps them. It helps us. And I think Trump was just saying, why not just own the place? What's in Greenland? A lot of snow and ice. I know that. And I mean, no offense to any Greenlanders out there or any Danish. I think it was thrown out there. So what? So let's move on from that. Let's get to Cain and the other people. Now, we left off with this. And remember where I was kind of heading with this? It's a kind of a strange curveball we took the other night. And I don't know if you remember all this from the other night, but as we were talking about this, I started talking about how Cain had gone east from Eden, how he had killed his brother in recap, how he had gone and married his wife, or at least laid with his wife. Where do you think the term? We used to think it was a grass vulgar term. Hey, you getting laid tonight? Hey, I laid this sexy woman or this sexy guy. That comes from having lain with. And Adam laid with his wife and knew her, and they bore a son. Kind of thing. So Cain went to Nod. You're right, Sterling. And the land of Nod was what we were talking about. Now, just east of Eden. The neat thing, when I wrote about this in the article and I wrote about it in my own book, I recapped some of this stuff in, I believe it was the Reptilians book, the source of Eden, the location of Eden. I don't think there's any way to pinpoint the Garden of Eden. Even if it was wholly 100% a factual story, this is a religious story. It's a story of faith. Did Eden exist? I think the region existed. We're given a description in the Old Testament of the region of Eden where the garden lay. You talk about the Euphrates and the Tigris on the south. Talked about the Gihon and the Pishon rivers, the Gihon and the Pishon as rivers that bordered it up near the Caspian Sea. So you're looking at this region that is now Iraq, and that this is where, in this fertile crescent area, where they used to say, now they've shifted all emphasis and said mankind started in Africa. And I always wondered why. Well, what happened to the Fertile Crescent? We were told the cradle of civilization was the Fertile Crescent, that stretch of land between the Euphrates and the Tigris rivers in what is now Iraq. And that this was the beginning of civilization. Somewhere it all flipped over. And I don't know if there's a political motivation behind that or not. It just seemed funny that suddenly, when we were taught in school that civilization began in the Fertile Crescent in Mesopotamia, now we're learning that it started in Africa. I don't care. Doesn't matter. Wrote about East of Eden. Yeah. A good one. I wish that were an academic novel. And of course, we know that, um, oh, what's his name? James Dean, of course, played Adam in that movie of the same name. No, he did not. So you always wonder why James. No, he did not. So you always wonder why James Dean became such a phenomenon. I think it was because he died. He only made 2 movies, and yet you see his pictures all over the place and pop art and all of that. James Dean made 2 movies and got killed in his car and wrecked the car. So East of Eden, Nod, is what they called that. And there was a breakdown for the name of Nod. In the Hebrew, it's the verb to wander. And it's obviously this etymological causation intended to explain the wandering nomadic lifestyle of Cain and all of his putative descendants, the Kenites. And they became this wandering sort of tribe that were metallurgists and other things that they brought to early civilization. And but of course, this tribe started by Cain having a kid, and with his wife. While she had the kid, he helped make it. And the question was, where did his wife come from? Now it's interesting. This just popped into my mind. I had a dream last night about this, about Cain and the other people. This just popped back into my head. It's funny because it was about the wandering people, and it was about the Kenites. Isn't that weird how the brain works? I didn't remember that until just now as I'm talking about it, that I dreamt about that last night. I wish I could reattach my cognitive conscious mind to what was going on in that dream and why that was there. That's interesting. Because I was thinking as I was talking, where did I have this conversation before? I thought, oh, wait, I dreamt about that. That's interesting. Anyway, moving on. It's a nod is kind of this play on words. It's typical of rabbinic writings that you would see in ancient times, suggesting that this is a later scribal interpretation of the land where Cain is wandering to. He went east of Eden. He didn't know where he was going. In other words, because there was nothing out there, at least according to the biblical tale. And these are the holes you start seeing in the biblical tale, is that he went east and he had sex with his wife, married a wife, it says, and had children, and built a city and named the city after his son. So what does this all mean? And we know that the word city also meant the word, he named it after his son Enoch, which we covered this in both the last 2 times you talked about this, but how linguistically that word in ancient times, the E could have the U sound, the Enoch, the U sound, the Enoch, the N could have an R sound. The K had a GH or a CH sound. GH or a CH sound. And so the Enoch became Unuk, and it became Uruk, which became Iraq in modern English, modern language. First place, first dwelling. And it was a city that Cain built, according to the biblical tale. He went out and built a city. Now, it could refer to something as simple as a few mud huts with thatched roof, surrounded by a timber structure or a rock structure as a wall. It could mean, it could have covered, the size of a city yard. When you think of living out in the suburbs, take a yard, a 16th of an acre. It could have been something like that with a little rock wall built around it, an enclosure with a couple of, he had the main house and maybe a shed for his animals. And think of that too, as you're out there. What if this is a true story, if it's literal and to be taken literally? You go out east of the land of Nod, from Eden, where your parents were created from the dust of the ground, And it doesn't say he had any other relatives. And you go out into the wide world, and there's nobody else out there. And there's no roads. There's no inns to stay in at night. There's no restaurants along the way. There's no gas stations. And certainly no internet. And I'm being silly with it now, but imagine that. If that were a literal story, there's absolutely nothing out there other than nature. And nature, as we know, it can be violent. So you're going out and there's nowhere to go. So he's a wanderer, Nod. And Nod was east and down the mountain from Eden. I think you're right, McComb. And that region. And that region is current day Iraq. I'm sorry. Yeah, now I got that backwards because Uruk, where cancel, back up. Eden, that region in Eden, when you look at it, is in current day Iran. Iraq is to the east. So, yeah, there you go. Now, there is Cain's descendants, the Bible says, were without territory. That means they didn't own anything. He had this nomadic lifestyle of Cain. His future putative descendants, the Kenites, this sort of play it's typical of just suggesting the scribal interpretation, which is more likely inserted to suggest that Cain's descendants were without territory. And in other words, they were nomads. Additionally, the Hebrew language didn't exist prior to the time of Abraham, who lived some 4,000 years, 4 millennia after Cain. I mean, you think back to the time of Jesus, it's only half that time, 2,000 years. Double that. Go to 2000 BC, and you get the idea of the distance between Cain and Abraham. And the language Cain and his descendants would have spoken was probably this Nilotic or Cushitic language that's closer to older Arabic or Dedanite. So all of this stuff about where Cain went, what he did, the woman he married, are the questions that we have. People, who was the wife? Where did she come from? I know that specifically in the text, let me see if I can find it here. In the text, in the biblical account, when it talks about, it's in Genesis 4:25. After Cain left, it says, Adam made love to his wife again, and she gave birth to a son and named him Seth, saying, God has granted me another child in place of Abel, since Cain killed him. So this was one of the texts I looked to and say, if you look at that, what it's literally saying is that she had a third child, and she named him Seth to replace her lost son, Cain. So the question, lots of questions in my mind arise. How old were Cain and Abel? And if they were twins, how old were they when Cain murdered Abel? And when that took place, it says that Adam made love to his wife again, and she had a son, Seth. Does that mean again after hundreds of times they'd made love? Or does that mean, and there are other children, Abel, and she called him Seth? So there's this idea that there weren't any other kids. So the argument then starts to fall flat that this was maybe a sister or an extended cousin, because many years had gone by since the birth of Cain and Abel, and there were many descendants of Adam and Eve. So his sister was Cain's wife. Let's see, Mother Key, you said, his sister, you're saying. We don't know that for sure because the text doesn't state it. All we can do is, that's a speculation, Mother Key, that was who she was. There is nothing that upright states that it was Cain's sister. And there's no mention of the sister. Now, if we are to look at biblical passages and the mandate, both rabbinic and Christian, in studying the Old Testament was that words mean something. The language is explicit. So we see language over the years, it gets changed. There's been lots of scribal additions. Did they delete the fact that Adam and Eve had other children? And the question would have to be why? Why doesn't it mention that? And if these are indeed the writings of Moses, why would Moses have omitted that from the story? Or did he? Did somebody else add these things and detract these things or delete these things from the scripture? Hey, Marlise, how you doing? Nice to see you. And Mother Key, good to see you too, by the way. And so you've got all this textual stuff. Now, I need to dig into some of the text. Last night, I was talking to Jeff about this. I said, what about this whole thing about Cain, that his offering was the offering of human children? And this is why God rejected it. I see from the text in the passage says that Cain offered up the first fruits of his husbandry, his labor, vegetables, and that Abel offered up the first fruits of his work, which was shepherding. And so he offered the animal with the blood, and that Cain did not. And Cain offered up vegetables. So I want to look into that and study that a little bit more, because I hadn't heard that until somebody mentioned it here the other night. And then it struck remembrance that I'd heard Jeff talk about this. So Jeff and I talked last right there in the text. And so I look at the text and I don't find it. So I've got to see what the words mean, how the words have been changed, the edits made in them, what some of the ancient Hebrew words actually meant. Because if we go all the way back to that scene, where was it? Hold on, I've got it in here. Let's see. If I go back up to blah, blah, blah. So Cain was very angry. Okay. It says here in Genesis 4, 1-5. Now, this is just English version, which we know doesn't reflect all the nuance of the original language. Adam made love to his wife Eve, and she became pregnant and gave birth to Cain. She said, with the help of the Lord, I have brought forth a man. Later, she gave birth to his brother Abel. Now, how much later? We don't know. We were talking about all these family creation mythologies spread across different religions, different cultures that have first families in creation, always have these multiple births for the first children, twins, triplets, quadruplets, and so on. So it says later she gave birth to Abel. Now, is that much later? I've got to look. I haven't looked that up in the Hebrew yet, but does that mean later? Does that mean some other, just general, some other time? Does it mean distant? Is this a word for later in the English that could mean either distant time later, some months later, years later, or could it mean, in minutes, meaning he was a twin? I don't know that without looking into the text of that. But it says she gave birth to his brother Abel. Now it goes on. It says, now Abel kept flocks and Cain worked the soil. In the course of time, again, we don't know how much time, Cain brought some of the fruits of the soil as an offering to the Lord. And Abel also brought an offering, fat portions from some of the firstborn of his flock. The Lord looked with favor on Abel and his offering, but on Cain and his offering he did not look with favor. So Cain was very angry and his face was downcast. Boom. End of passage about the offerings. Now, I'm going to dig into the Hebrew of this because I would like to know. I'm going to ask Jeff about his source material because I want to know. I don't see human sacrifice in there. That doesn't mean it didn't happen that way. So I want to see what that was all about. Maybe it's the principle behind everything, the whole shedding of blood stuff. But here you've got Abel bringing the fat portions from some of the firstborn of his flock, and he offered them. Now, is fat referring to the buildup of his flocks, and he gave of the fat of the land, so to speak, of his, or what? So I'm going to look into that a little bit more. The first aisle detailing the time from the planting of the Garden of Eden. Good, Mother Key. I know of that, and so I'd like to look into that. I'd like to find out the veracity of the text in that and what the text says. So I'm going to look into that. Ask Jeff about that. Macabre says the forgotten books of Eden are very interesting. Has them coming out of the earth, a cave, and the sun was sacred to Adam. I'll get to your question in a second, Marlise. So I know in the Native American Lakota story of Wankata or something like that, and the names that the first family ascended out of the underground. They ascended from the underground of the earth and squinted in the first light of day, and they became human topside dwellers. So Adam was afraid of the sun, says Macabre. In that book, yes, maybe so. There was also the notion that the whole flood story, we talked about this a while back. We were talking about Noah, how there's the theory that the earth was surrounded, the firmament, by a vapor canopy, if you will. And we never really saw the sun. You could see the haziness of it from this vapor canopy, this moisture, this water kept in the firmament. But you didn't see blue sky. You didn't see a clear shot of the globe of the sun. What you saw was the brightness of the sun breaking through what would look like, hazy overcast with the sun barely breaking through. And so that when the flood took place, it says the windows of heaven were opened. That didn't mean just rain. It meant this whole firmament was broken open, and it cascaded down. And this is why people lived so long before the flood, and not quite so long afterwards, because the UV protection was gone from the rays of the sun. So maybe being afraid of the sun with Adam, speculating, meant that he knew the sun would age him. I don't know. I got to look into the languages again and refresh my mind on these things. So, also, who was it? Just asked me. Marlise, do I think the story is real in the Bible? It's a metaphorical tale. It's a cover-up tale that has detail of things that are in code language to indicate that something different happened. The whole idea of Eve taking it wasn't an apple, it just said a piece of fruit. Eve is tempted by the serpent. The serpent says, "You won't die." He takes the fruit and she eats of it, finds that it's good. Oh, and by the way, before she even ate it, what does the Bible say? It says she looked at the fruit and saw that it was something that looked good and delicious and looked as though it would make her wise. How do you look at I don't look at a banana and go, now that looks scrumptious, and that looks like something that's going to bring me wisdom if I eat it. So what did that mean to her? She was looking at the whole idea of what the forbidden tree was. It would make her wise. And there were two trees at the center of the garden. So she took eat of this. She gave it to Adam. And says, Adam, cool. She's like, here, eat this. What's that taste like to you? The first taste test in humanity. Eat this. What's that taste like? Does that taste like wisdom? So Adam, it says, took a bite, and poof, they were both naked, is what we know. So the point, following the point along, is that Adam and Eve did this. They took the first bite, and so sin nature was supposed to enter, and so on. So is that, yet when you dig a little deeper, you find that all the language in there are verbs, action verbs that are actually used in sex, seduction, things like that. That the serpent beguiled Eve, seduced her. Eve gave into that. She took the apple, meaning she took possession. It was a sexual thing. She gave to Adam. It was a sexual thing. There was either and not to be, and I've said this before, so don't be too surprised, and not to be, naughty with my language, but which, never mind, I'm making too many caveats. Doesn't matter. It was either a sexual three-way with Nakash, the serpent character, Eve, and Adam, or she had sex with the serpent character, which we know was not a snake. It was Nakash, one of the Elohim, and she, in turn, has sex with Adam. So it's either all at the same time or was different times. But it says she bore Cain and Abel as a result. Now, I believe that Cain was a descendant of Nakash. Nakash fathered Cain, and Adam fathered Abel, was reading no apple, sex there had. I'm not quite sure what you're saying, darling, but I think that there was no apple, there was no fruit. I think that this was a word picture that was being used to describe sexual infiltration, if you will. That the serpent character taught Adam and Eve about sex. They hadn't done this thing before. Who knows how far into the creation they were? Was this the first day, the second day, the third day, the 100th year? We don't know. If this is a true story and God created them out of the dust of the ground, how long were they alive before they tested the boundaries of what they were told they could and could not do? And that's a good question. Don't eat of the tree at the center of the garden. And there was actually two of them, the tree of life and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And when they ate the fruit, that was the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, because it said Eve saw that it would make her wise, so she ate it. And it says their eyes were opened. And what did the knowledge of good and evil? And had become just us, plural. Therefore, let us go down and prevent them from also eating of the tree of life, lest they live forever. So there's this whole plurality of Elohim that are saying, got to stop them. They've gone a little too far already. They told them what, and I've always wondered, God gives humanity, according to this story, free will. You have free will to love me or reject me, to follow my wishes and my demands or not. You have free will to do that, and I give it to you. But if you violate your free will and do what I told you not to do, I'm going to fuck you up forever. From Adam, sin entered into the world. It says, and that we all inherit sin nature, which is contrary to what we believe, that we are all gods, that we all have. I'm not going to get into that teaching tonight, so I don't want to get into. You know exactly what I'm talking about. So, getting back to this, this is where the inherent sin nature was supposed to come from. And so, in answer to your question, Marlise, yes, I believe there's some truth to the story. Do I believe it's literal? I'm not sure. I believe it's an encoded message. I believe all creation stories tend to seem to route back to this same proto-religion that existed. Something very similar to this happened, if not this being the story itself. That would be saying everybody else's story is wrong and the Hebrew story is correct and the only correct one. So thank you, Audrey, for that, by the way. Yes, go support me. And by the way, if you'd like to get tarot reading, go over to my site that Audrey just typed into the chat room, scottallenroberts.com. Click on the tarot link at the top, and you go buy a link and over there, and you can get some readings set up. That's one of the things I do that you can help me to expand what I do here and support my research and my work, but at the same time, you get something right back. So go over to the tarot readings. I also do design and illustration. I do book cover design, book interior design, illustration, also graphic design, logos, corporate identities, stuff like that. You can find that all over on my website, scottallenroberts.com. And Allen is A-L-A-N, just like she spelled it in the chat room, scottallenroberts.com. Or go to Rocky Stucci's site, streamingtalkradio.com, and click on my link over there, and you're going to find all my junk and how to get to it. So all this stuff with Adam and Eve, I hope I haven't lost touch with the point that I was going for, is that when Cain went out to and planted fruits in the field and offered them up, and Abel offered up the fat of his flocks, that God was pleased with Abel's but displeased with Cain's. Was he displeased because Cain was sacrificing children, as has been suggested? And I'm not saying that didn't happen. I'm saying I don't know it. I don't know the language there. I've got to look into that. And I'm going to be trying to find out a little bit more about this. because I've only heard that speculated before, and I'm not sure where it's at. That's why we backtracked here and looked into the text. I don't see it in the text, at least in the English translation, which we know can be full of holes. So I want to go back to the Hebrew, which I can't do right now for you tonight, but I'll look into that. But it seems to be pretty clear in the English. So let's see what goes on there. See you later, Audrey. Thanks for being here. Let's see, Macabre, what my artwork would look like for your Macabre book. It would look amazing. It all depends on what you need done. And you can go over to my site, Sterling, and take a look at the stuff I do. You'll get a really good idea as to whether you think it would be a fit for you or not. Thank you for asking. And there's a little live advertising and negotiating going on right here during the show, folks. And so it says that Cain was angry because God, how does it say it here? It says the Lord looked with favor on Abel and his offering, but on Cain and his offering, he didn't look with favor. So Cain was very angry and his face was downcast. And then the Lord said to Cain, "Why are you angry? Why is your face downcast? If you do what's right, will you not be accepted? But if you don't do what's right, sin is crouching at your door. It desires to have you, but you must rule over it." Now, this is where Jeff even intimated to me a bit last night in passing. He says it's in that passage where God says sin is lying at the door. So I'm going to parse this passage down and look at it. When I wrote this particular article that I'm referring to, I wasn't looking for that, and I wasn't even aware that it was there. And I didn't break down all the Hebrew of this passage. But I was mostly looking at it from an exegete of the English language version. So if you don't know what's right, sin's crouching at your door. It desires to have you, but you must rule over it. Now, we always interpreted that as meaning God's warning Cain, don't kill your brother Abel. Sin's waiting at the door. Don't give in to it just because you're pissed off. Now, is that what it means or not? That's what I always thought it meant. I may have to detach from that meaning once I look into this a little deeper. So this is a warning that's given to Cain. And we see that God didn't talk to Abel to warn him at all. If he did, it's not recorded in the passage, which means it's either just a story or there are just elements that are omitted or elements that didn't happen. So God came to him after the murder and he said, "What have you done?" He said, "Listen, your brother's blood cries to me from the ground. Now you're under a curse and you're driven from the ground, which opened its mouth to receive your brother's blood from your hand." Now, that might be the passage, too, that we're talking about. Is this poetic language that God is talking about the murder of Abel by Cain? Is that what we're seeing here? Is this poetic language? Or is there something more to this? That Abel was giving the blood sacrifice to God of his sheep and goats, and Cain was not doing it right, and God was displeased because he was given vegetables. We've also heard that God as Elohim was a bloody God. He wanted the blood. He needed the blood sacrifice. We see this from the very beginning, talking about the kinsman redeemer, having the scapegoat, sacrificing sheep, all the way up through temple worship and sacrifice of animals for the atonement of sin. So all of this is the bloody God. Yet we're seeing a passage where God is angry because Cain shed his brother's blood. Now, this was the question, I think, that was brought up. Some of it's starting to come back to me a little bit, is that Cain went ahead and offered his brother Abel. You want blood? I'll give you blood. Was it done out of a genuine heart, thinking this was the right thing to do, or did Cain sacrifice his brother in his anger? I'm going to kill my brother. You want blood, Lord? I'll give you blood. I'll give you my brother's blood right here and now. Whack, slice, gurgle. And is that what happened? I don't know. God says his brother's blood cried out to him from the ground. And now you're under a curse. And you're driven from the ground, which opened its mouth to receive your brother's blood from your hand. Is that a literal passage? Is that poetic language of saying the blood-soaked ground you're standing on is now put a curse on you because you murdered your brother? Maybe. That is very possible. If you've got the God that desires blood, it says that Abel offered up the fat of his herd in the English. And again, I do not have my Hebrew up in front of me here, and I can't show it to you or share it to you, but with you right here and now. But it says that Abel kept flocks and Cain worked the soil. And in the course of time, Cain brought some of the fruits of the soil, and Abel also brought, now it says, and Abel also brought an offering, fat portions from some of the firstborn of his flock. There's the key. We got to find out what that means in the Hebrew. Well, who were the firstborn of his flock? Was it what's the word I'm looking for? A metaphor for his own children? Did Abel believe he needed to sacrifice children to God? Was this part of, like we hear of Marduk worship later on, and the building of the Nimrod and the building of the Tower of Babel? Were these things that took place because it was a misinterpretation of what they thought God wanted them to do? And which this so-called God really liked? Yeah, blood. So this is very possible. And you see how you have to stop sometimes. Was Cain under a curse because he didn't? Was Abel's sacrifice accepted because it was the blood of human children? Or because it was blood of lambs? It's worth looking into some more. And I will. Not sure how quickly, but I'll get that done. Roger says, "Oh, Scotty, I'm very tardy. Glad to be here. Glad to have you here. It's only an hour late, and that's okay. I thought it was going to be very short and I'd be done by now. But we rabbit trailed, of course. So let's leave that where it stands. He's gone east to Eden, which we covered east of Eden, which we covered last night. Built the first city, which we described the linguistics of the word Enoch, which was his son, and he named the city after him. The land of Nod, we talked about. Now, this is where mythology plus history divided by spirituality equals wonder. Remember this? We talked about this last night. I want to hit this up again. Who are these other people? Consider this. I'm going to repeat this Carl Sagan quote I read last night. Our tiny corner of the universe may have been visited thousands of times in the past few billions of years. So said Carl Sagan in Intelligent Life in the Universe in 1966. And he co-authored this with I.S. Shklovsky. At least one of these visits may have occurred in historical times, meaning during the time of humanity. And Sagan was an astronomer. He was an exobiologist, as well as an established atheist and a reasoned skeptic. Theorized that Earth may have been visited by various galactic civilizations many times during Earth's primordial past. He also insisted that it was not entirely out of the realm of possibility that extraterrestrial artifacts and remains of visitations and even civilizations may still exist, or that some of the alien bases that were maintained within our solar system are still there to provide continuity for successive expeditions. This was put forward by Carl Sagan, one of the really the founder of the skeptic movement, and a scientist. He is a catalyst for many in the ufology community and the field to theorize that humankind may have been the result of seeding, extraterrestrial genetic interference. And so I know your question a little earlier, Marlise, was, do I believe the Adam and Eve story to be literal? I think it is a cover story for Race Interrupted. I think the story of the Messiah, the coming Messiah, whom very early on they refer to, the first prophecy of a Messiah coming was in Genesis 3, in the garden, post fall of man, where God, you will bite his heel, but he will return and crush your head. Rabbinic scholars, Christian scholars, all alike believe this is the first messianic prophecy. And this all played out in the Jewish, it wasn't even Jewish, the Israelite tradition of the kinsman redeemer, the one who would be one of us redeemer. And it had a position in their law that there was the kinsman who would redeem a family if his brother died, leaving a wife and kids. He would have to step in and take over. He was the kinsman redeemer. And so this played into the coming Messiah. The Messiah would be the kinsman redeemer, the one who had to be one of us, redeemer, and to be the perfect sacrifice for man to God. I mean, there's a wicked circle jerk going on there when you think about it. And sorry to use that phraseology for those who may be sensitive to that. But when you think about that, God introduced the capability of sin, then said, if you sin, you will fall from me and deserve eternal separation from me in hell, which came up much later. And the only way to redeem yourself is by the shedding of blood, which offers redemption from sin. Okay? And so then he sends his son in the form of the Godhead, comes down, impregnates a woman, not by choice. She didn't consent to that. And she was young, 12, 13 years old. He impregnates her. This is God, very God, very God. The kenosis, we called it, from Koine Greek, the emptying of himself, of his godhood, and became a man or a human. And when this happened, he then takes on the sin of the world by his death, burial, and resurrection from the dead. But if he emptied himself of being God, yet as God became the atonement, the redemption, he was the perfect kinsman redeemer. So now when you think about that, all through the Old Testament, when they keep telling you that the Messiah has to come, the kinsman redeemer is coming. And remember, in Israel, there was always, with Israelites, the Messiah is coming. Some family will be blessed by the coming of God in human form. And when they kept through all the genealogies that are recorded in the Old Testament, the book of Numbers and others, they are trying to show that between Adam and Noah, between Noah and Abraham, between Abraham and David, it became later, between David and Jesus' mother, that there was a pure, unbroken human line. Because the Redeemer had to be one of us, kinsman Redeemer. Now, if they keep telling you it's a one of us Redeemer, what are they telling you? They're obviating that there's something else, something that's not so human, something that is not one of us, that cannot be the Redeemer. So I believe the whole Old Testament, the story of the Messiah and the race was interrupted. And this is what Carl Sagan was talking about, without getting into the aspects. Although I can't imagine that he skipped any of this stuff in his research. So even the DNA linkages have diminished over the years, the more we study between us and primates. Still, and I talked about this at great extent, the when we started this series, and in the book of the Nephilim, when I read that months back, is that we have all these stages of evolution, but we don't have any real links between any of them. We've built what we believe are links, but there's no DNA to link them all together. There's none of the transitional species. We just have a series of different species that they've lined. We think that these create the line of ascendancy of humankind, evolutionarily speaking. We don't know it for sure. It might be fact, but we don't know it for sure. And while evidence is only circumstantial, it's beginning to look as if the link to primates is becoming less and less an active, provable theory on the genetic level. The main link between humans and our primate cousins may very well have been DNA provided from outside our world. Where they talk about is it AB negative? Why am I not remembering what it is? The rhesus blood type, they say, comes from the rhesus monkey and so on. That when they discovered this in the mid-1950s, they said this is a blood type, this is a DNA strand that exists nowhere else on this planet. It's unique to humans and only certain humans. Does that mean that's a bloodline that's showing up from extraterrestrial seeding? Possible. Don't know for sure. Macabre says Anunnaki. That's what I said. Way back. The RH negative. There you go. Thank you, Michelle. And I've written about it. And again, that's one of those little things. I'm calling it, what is it? What? Some OB negative. It did RH negative. There it is. So that's it. So now, the serpent in the garden. Let's move on to this. The book of Genesis recounts this tale, and I've talked about it many times on this show. About Eve, the fall of man. She's the mother of all humanity, and she was the cause, according to the Bible, of the fall of mankind, thus breeding into us all a sinful nature that puts us all in need of this kinsman redeemer. And and while she gave the fruit to Adam, Adam was the one held responsible, that all sons of Adam, children of Adam and Eve, but she's the one. Remember that? God's like, they said, Adam says to God when he's looking for him after the fall, the eating of the fruit, you know, where are you? And Adam yells out, well, we're hiding. Why are you hiding? God says, because we're naked. God said, who told you were naked? So apparently there was, at least in the story, there was no knowledge that they were naked or no awareness of it. Meaning they knew they didn't have any clothes on, but they probably didn't mean anything. Who told you were naked? God asks. And gave me this thing, the fruit. And he goes, woman. And she goes, it was the snake. Nakash, she gave in. Then God curses Nakash and all that. We all know how that went. The blame game. So Lilith was a smart one? Maybe. She ditched long before this. So, have you ever encountered a serpent that walked upright? That spoke in an audible, understanding voice? According to Genesis, the snake that Eve encountered did both of those things. And while it's probably safe to say that Eve was not very experienced in the ways of the world, seeing as she was the first woman that we know of, other than perhaps Lilith, which is in rabbinic writings, it's also probably very safe to say she knew the difference between a snake and a man. And according to the scripture, the snake was neither. It says, now the serpent was more crafty than any of the wild animals the Lord God had made. He said to the woman, did God really say you must eat from the tree? You cannot eat from any tree in the garden. And the Hebrew used in the book is for the word snake is nakash. And it means magician, enchanter, a spellbinder, to illuminate, to shine. And the Jewish rabbinic interpretation never saw this word as meaning a literal snake, nor did it ever define it as Satan, the devil, Lucifer, any of those. That came over 1,000 years before that attribution was made. Now, Jewish rabbinic interpretation never saw this as being literal. It was to be understood as a shining being with power to enchant. And this is a far cry from a snake in the grass. And in many interpretations, it's none other than Lucifer. Although his name's never mentioned. There's nothing linking him to the garden until somebody says that old serpent, the devil, over 1,000 years later. And although the passage itself never actually calls the fact out, it's this being that influences Eve, beguiles her, in a more accurate sense, into eating the fruit of the forbidden tree. And the Hebrew word for tree is etz, E-T-S, it's pronounced. A word that's very close in association with the Hebrew word toledah, meaning generations. And it's from these words that we draw the modern equivalent of family tree. We use that all the time. My family tree did this, and so on. Familytree.com, Ancestry.com. Go look at my family tree. Go look at my toledah. Etz toledah, toledah etz. I don't know how it's. And so in a broad application, the same word can apply to the term portal. Opening of one's mind. Enlightenment. And by the way, when it calls Nakash, the bright shining one, the enlightener, the illuminator, it refers to, you can go all the way, jump up to Psalm 82, where you have the Elohim. And God says, in the English it says, and God said to the divine council, or the sons of God, you are all gods. In the Hebrew it says, and Elohim said to the group of Elohim, you are all Elohim, the bright, shining, illuminating princes of heaven. So, was Nakash one of his characters? He was a bright, shining one. I think he was. He was one of the Elohim. So, it's highly suggested the tree of knowledge of good and evil, from which Eve is said to have eaten the forbidden fruit, wasn't a literal tree at all, but rather symbolic of pre-Adamic races that lived in the regions. So about that. I'm looking at some of these good old sin doctrination, right, Michelle? So, Atlantean. The tree of knowledge of good and evil was not a tree at all. Symbolic of pre-Adamic races that existed prior to God saying, okay, scrub all that. Yeah, I'm starting with Adam. I'm creating a new guy. Or one of my own. Maybe some of the other gods had their own. Other planets, other beings. Maybe, and we've speculated on this before. There's a lot behind this. I'm just going to hit it light here because it's already 10:20. But maybe what we saw as gods were alien cultures. And we interpreted that as gods. So the fruit of the tree is the Hebrew word pieri, or it's a fruit, produce of the ground, offspring, children, progeny of the womb. Now this is where you have that Cain brought the fruits of the ground for his sacrifice. That can also mean offspring, children, progeny, figuratively fruit. Then there's the phrase to eat of it, with back to Eve again here, akal. This word has many uses, which means to lay with a woman. Sexual intercourse is one of the terms. The word touch is the Hebrew word nagah, to touch, to lay hand upon. A euphemism for to touch, to have sex with a woman. And what is it Nakash said? You will not certainly die. The serpent said to the woman, for God knows that when you eat of it, your eyes will be opened, and you'll be like God, knowing good and evil. And when the woman saw that the fruit of the tree was good for food and pleasing to the eye, and also desirable for gaining wisdom, she took some and ate it. She also gave some to her husband, who was with her, and he ate it. Then the eyes of both of them were opened, and they realized they were naked. So they sewed fig leaves together and made coverings for themselves. So what you've got here, this is no ordinary tree. In fact, it's not a literal tree at all in the Garden of Eden story. Many biblical scholars interpret this as Lucifer, the character there. But again, over 1,000 years later, I don't think the devil or Lucifer had anything to do with Nakash. The phrase pleasant to the eyes is chamad in Hebrew. Chamad, to desire, to covet, to take pleasure, and to delight in, to be desirable, to delight greatly, to desire greatly, desirableness, pleasure, preciousness. The word desired is the Hebrew word ta'ava, to yearn for, to lust after, used of bodily appetites, a longing. By implication, it's a delight. It's subjectively satisfaction, objectivity, a charm, a desire, a wish, longings of one's heart, lust, an appetite, covetousness in a bad sense, to covet, to wait longingly. And then the word took, she took the fruit, is a Hebrew word, lakach, and it's a primitive root to take in the widest variety of applications, to take, to lay hold of, to receive, to marry, to take a wife, to take to or for a person, to procure, to get some, to take possession of, to select, to choose, to take in marriage, to receive, to accept. And so a very different picture of Eve and her temptation in the Garden of Eden is beginning to emerge. The parsed passage above is far more than the sinful, disobedient appreciation of fruit. I think I'll just break God's command. Screw him. I'm going to eat the fruit. It looks good. It's all a word picture. What really happened in this scene in the Garden of Eden is that Eve, the mother of humanity, lost her virginity to the serpent character Nakash, one of the Elohim, as you can see, that she encountered him sexually before ever having sex with her husband Adam. And further down the passage, the text is implicit that Eve was impregnated by this encounter. And then she drew her husband into the scenario. Now remember, the Bible says through the first Adam, sin entered the world. By the second Adam, meaning Christ, sin would be away. Isn't it interesting that the first Adam and the second Adam, Adam and Christ, or Jesus in the New Testament, he's called the second Adam. Isn't it interesting that they are both born because there's an impregnation? God creates one out of the dust of the ground. The other one, God impregnates a young woman. And even here with Cain, we've got the impregnation of a woman. Probably as young as they get. It's Eve. Mature, obviously, because she gave a child. But the serpent character impregnates her. Let's see. Thanks for that, Roger. I think you can go back and you can listen to all of these already, if that's what you mean, if that's what you're getting at. So Cain was the blood seed of the serpent. Abel was the blood seed of Adam. Now, this whole alien interpretation thing that I hit on the other day, who are these other people? What the hell is going on in all of this? Creation of first couple, birth of first twins, murder, the first wanderer, the first marked man, marrying another woman, and building a city somewhere where there's nobody else. The earliest human civilization of which contemporary science has any archaeological record is the Sumerian culture of ancient Mesopotamia. This is the cradle of civilization, whose sudden onset of culture remained a mystery for many, many years. A quantum leap in mankind's intellectual development occurred in Sumer 6,000 years ago, when the very first cuneiform writing was developed to record a dramatical event, the starburst of Vela X, or Vela 10, a star that went supernova about 1,300 light years away from our solar system. It can still be seen today as a faintly flashing pulsar. And virtually overnight, in evolutionary terms, the Sumerians gave the world written language, the first fundamental character of which was the Sumerian symbol for star, was one of the very first symbols created in human language, then demonstrated how that first word ever written by a human hand was soon after linked to the symbol for deity, communicating the term star god. This is all in ancient cuneiform, Mesopotamian culture. So in the blink of an eye, the Sumerians gave humanity the first love song, the first school system, the first direct pharmaceutical concoctions, spells, incantations. They gave the first law code. They gave the first parliament. The roots of Judeo-Christian religious belief grew from the tree of knowledge, a few miles to the northeast and northwest. And the origins of Western culture are nursed in Sumer and has come to be acknowledged as the cradle of civilization, all due to a supernova, which pushed some guy. Remember, curiosity drives science. So when he saw this, he wanted to record this, and they started creating Sumerian language or cuneiform to record this event. And it's during this same period that Berosus, you remember him? He was a Babylonian high priest. Remember ever hear him mentioned, Berosus? He wrote of the forthcoming of the half-fish, half-human Oannes, the beast with reason who appeared in their midst. He taught the Sumerians letters, sciences, every kind of art. He taught them how to construct houses, create laws, and the arts of agriculture, sciences, every kind of art. He taught them how to construct houses, create laws, and the arts of agriculture. He taught them everything that would soften their manners and civilize them. Oannes was the half fish, half man who would rise up out of the waters. And he and his people, and they would teach these things to humanity. Is that just a far-fetched story? Is it mythology like we have our mythology? Anything to this? Is it any more efficacious? Does it have any more veracity than the mythology we read in the book of Genesis? That God did all these things. So Cain, the twin brother of Abel, was fathered by Nakash, one of the Elohim, very possibly linked to the whole reptilian issue, but I don't see it strong enough to bring that out. I think that's a comparison that's made. This event went down in religious mythology as the fall of mankind at the hand of Eve's temptation, the eating of the forbidden fruit, quote unquote. And Cain murdered his twin brother in accordance with the enmity that was set between the twin siblings. Remember, it said, God said to Eve and Adam and the serpent after the fall, he said, and there will be constant enmity between the seed of the serpent and the seed of the woman. The separate seed, the dual seed doctrine. So this enmity had started between Cain and Abel. Constant. Started from the very beginning, the get-go. Cain murdered his twin brother. And after being banished by God from the region of Eden, he wandered into Nod, in the region just east of Eden, and there he built a city which became known throughout history as Uruk, the first city. Cain did not have an encounter with the other people. Cain was the other people. It's clear that he bequested to the inhabitants of Sumer some connectivity to another race that had interrupted the human race. Either reptilians from the sea, dragons from the sky, whatever you want to call it. Humankind was genetically altered by extraterrestrial intelligences. Most probably. And we have the Sumer-Akkadian cuneiform text as a remnant of those events that altered the course of the human condition. And the big question is, do they still exist today? So this whole story of Cain and the other people, who were the other people? I believe you're looking at the story of Race Interrupted. Your doesn't matter when we go to work, when we browse the internet, when we play Monopoly or watch TV or play football or whatever. Nah, it doesn't matter. We are who we are. This is all just piles on us when we start considering where we came from, who the hell we are, how we got here, which is why all these things become questions in the first place. So there you go, folks. Cain and the other people. I think the other people, Cain was one of them, only in part. And it's a story of Race Interrupted. So there you go. Folks, thanks for being here. I appreciate your listening. Go visit my site, scottallenroberts.com. Go visit streamingtalkradio.com. Stream radio, real easy. That's Rocky Stucci's site, and you can find all of us and all our information on there. Both, all of us, Rocky, me, Jeff Dougherty, Professor Bauer. We're all on there. There's links to all our stuff. Please, before you go, like this video below and share it and get people to come on in and subscribe. It would be nice to build up my subscribership. So I hope you enjoyed what you heard and that this is meaningful for you. And thanks for being here. I'll talk to you soon. I won't see you again until Monday night when I launch my brand new nationally networked, syndicated radio show, The Intrepid Radio Program, which is just this program under an old name brought back. So we'll see you then, and we'll see how it all works on Monday. Everybody enjoys it. And I can't go on and on and on that show. I got limits with my time. If you watch the Situation Room, you'll know what I'm talking about. We got 25 minutes and 28-minute segments, and that's it. So you guys have a good weekend. May or may not see you over the weekend with something impromptu. You can always catch everything in archive form if you miss it live. So we'll see you later. Have a good night. See you Monday night for the big launch of the new gig. See you later. Thanks for being here. And thanks for taking your time to spend your time with me.